Good evening. This is Forum Daily for Thursday, July 14th. I'm Julie Stautland filling in for Nima Rajan. Ottawa is bringing back mandatory random testing of air travelers landing in Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver starting next week. The tests were paused on June 11th as part of the government's strategy to move testing away from the travel chaos in airports. All testing will be completed outside of airports for unvaccinated people as well as those who are fully or partially vaccinated. Nearly 2 million children between the ages of 6 months and 5 years old are now eligible to get a COVID-19 vaccination. Health Canada has approved Moderna's 2-dose vaccine for infants and preschoolers. A professor of family medicine and public health says health providers should be prepared to educate parents about the benefits of vaccinating their little ones against COVID-19. People are calling for major improvements to the healthcare system. This following the death of a man in a wheelchair in the emergency department waiting room of Fredericton's Dr. Everett Chalmers Hospital. Residential support worker John Staples says the man appeared to be in a lot of pain and discomfort as he waited for hours and eventually appeared to fall asleep, but had in fact died. Health Minister Dorothy Shepherd has called for a review of the incident, and the president of the health authority that oversees the hospital says the process has begun. Hockey Canada has published an open letter to Canadians. It includes an apology for not doing enough to address the actions of some members of the 2018 national junior team or to end the culture of toxic behavior within the game. It says that includes reopening the third-party investigation into an alleged sexual assault involving team members and making participation in that process mandatory. Ottawa and several corporate sponsors paused their funding after Hockey Canada quietly settled a lawsuit in May with a woman who claimed she was assaulted by 8 players at an event in London, Ontario. Lawyers representing more than 2,500 victims of sexual abuse by Catholic clergy in Quebec have written a letter to Pope Francis, asking him to provide swift justice for them. They allege that some religious congregations in the province have delayed legal proceedings by more than 10 years and say victims of abuse are expecting more than prayers. The lawyers want Pope Francis to give precise instructions to dioceses and congregations across the province regarding how to provide justice to victims. The letter comes in advance of the Pope's visit to Canada at the end of this month. A Senate committee says forced and coerced sterilization should be a criminal offense, and those subjected to it need an apology and compensation. The Human Rights Committee said in a report today that forced and coerced sterilizations persist in Canada to this day, and both legal and policy responses are needed. The senators say the horrific practice disproportionately affects vulnerable and marginalized groups, including Indigenous women, Black and racialized women, and people with disabilities. The report follows a committee study on forced and coerced sterilization in Canada that began in 2019. Shell Canada says it will significantly expand its electric vehicle charging network across the country. Shell announced Wednesday it will install 79 fast charging points at 37 of its retail stations across Canada by the end of the year. It plans to add thousands by 2025. Shell says it wants to be ready to meet growth in consumer demand. In Canada, electric vehicle sales grew by almost 60% last year. The Yukon government says a baby woolly mammoth discovered last month is the best preserved specimen found in North America. Travis Dulowski discovered the mammoth while digging for gold last month and says that at first he thought he had uncovered the body of a buffalo until he saw the creature's trunk. Mr. Dulowski's supervisor at Treadstone Gold says they sometimes find broken bones on their digs, but this animal appeared as if it died a week ago, with fresh skin, well-preserved hair, a trunk, and tiny toenails. Manufacturing sales fell 2% to $71.6 billion in May, following 7 straight months of gains. Sales dropped in 11 of the 21 industries that StatsCan tracks. Sales in the motor vehicle industry fell 31.9% due to retooling at auto assembly plants and semiconductor part shortages. After the break, a look at the Rogers service outage that took place across Canada. We speak with Mr. Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. So stay tuned. Forum Daily. We'll be right back. A legal expert says Rogers Communications' move to credit its customers with the equivalent of 5 days of service following a massive outage is wholly inadequate. Rogers made the announcement on Twitter on Tuesday, calling it a first step in earning back its customers' trust. But York University professor Richard LeBlanc calls it a minimum. Dr. LeBlanc says 5 days compensation is based on the idea that the damage can be quantified solely as a proportion of a monthly fee. But he says for some customers, the cost of missed sales and canceled payments would be broader than that. But the outage affected many Canadians and in many different ways. It has led some to ask questions about oligopolies in Canada. With us now is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Welcome back to Forum Daily, Brendan.
Julie, always great to be here.
The Rogers outage last week affected many Canadians, and for some, the service outage focused attention on Canadian oligopolies. What is an oligopoly?
Well, it's a nice way of saying a cartel. It means a group of companies, could be two companies, in which case it'd be a duopoly or more, but a limited group of companies that control a market. If they act in concert with each other, they can maximize their profit, perhaps to the detriment of customers. But there are advantages, and Canada has a lot of oligopolies in all kinds of different industries.
Does Canada have an oligopoly problem?
Well, that's a good question. Depends what you call a problem, because everybody's, any bug is somebody else's feature. So advantages to oligopolies, at least the way they're practiced in Canada, is that things tend to run smoothly. Until, like with the Rogers situation, they don't. So examples, we have two railroads, CN and CP. We have essentially two airlines, WestJet and Air Canada, but Porter flying out of the island terminal is pretty fun too. But we have the handful of banks, literally a handful of five major banks, Scotia and TD and the rest. And then we have, as we're talking about now, a limited number of cell phone carriers, and that number is getting ever smaller. Is it a problem? Again, only if things go wrong or if they work in concert together to really boost prices. And I think that's been the ongoing complaint for Canadians about these different industries, is that our prices are relatively high compared to what people pay in other parts of the world.
In the United States, there are people calling for giant tech companies like Facebook, Google, and Amazon to be broken up. Should Canadians be calling our companies to be broken up?
I think of different situations. So when they, for example, in the United States, broke up the railroads at the turn of the 20th century, or AT&T at the end of the 20th century, you had monopolies, literal one company industries that needed to be broken up. And that was very good for America, because a lot of competition sprung up. But I think the end result is what you want. I don't necessarily want to break up Bell or Rogers or the banks, but what I think we need to do is create an environment where competition is possible. Because one of the things that oligopolies do is use their pricing power, the relatively low cost of capital, to put the squeeze on any new startup. So I think it behooves governments to make the extra effort in these areas where there are these seemingly natural Canadian oligopolies, to make it easier for independent competition to spring up.
How might oligopolies impact the Canadian consumer in terms of competitive advantage or in terms of choice for those shopping around for the best price?
Well, it's the prisoner's dilemma. It's that whole mathematical concept in the Russell Crowe movie, A Beautiful Mind, where if a small group of individuals or corporations work together, they can work to their mutual advantage. And whenever companies get together, even for merriment or amusement, it almost always ends with a conspiracy against the public. So when an oligopoly switches to a cartel, that's when the pricing's the same, the services are the same, the products are the same, and yet the prices are higher than they should be. That's the argument that's made about Canadian cartels, and I think there is some truth to it. Not to say that the telecoms are operating as a cartel, but there is a natural tendency toward this cooperative prisoner's dilemma behavior, which does work against the public. So I don't think the solution is necessarily breaking it up, but simply making it easier for independent competitors to provide genuine choice.
Well, thank you so much for your input as always.
Thank you, Julie.
Up next, we take a look at the markets from Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, so stay tuned. Welcome back. It's time for our weekly market update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Julie. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we are seeing markets broadly lower today, down by about 1 to 2%, post, of course, inflation readings out of the United States. We had CPI as well as PPI yesterday and today, respectively. They did come in hotter than expected. Interestingly here, PPI up by 11.1% year over year. So certainly a high number that I know everybody is feeling and seeing, but it is actually down versus March, which was 11.6. Nonetheless, there's very much inflation fears out there, and that in fact we will get a policy mistake out of the U.S. Federal Reserve. Interestingly, markets are now pricing in an 80% probability that the U.S. Federal Reserve will hike 100 basis points at the July meeting, up from 0% prior to these inflation readings. Investors are also very much focused on the yield curve inversion. This is where the U.S. 2-year yield is higher than the 10-year yield. The bond market essentially indicating that there is fear of a recession. That, of course, is the biggest question out there right now. Are we in a recession right now, or is it coming? Away from that, of course, we've got earnings overhang. The United States just kicked off their second quarter earnings results. JP Morgan very much in focus, really with a downbeat reading. Headline miss, they suspended their buyback. Their investment banking business was down by 54%. Now, on the positive side, they did see an uptick in equity trading as well as fixed income and commodity trading. But they also accounted for $400 million in reserves. They did, on the positive side, say that the consumer is in great shape. We also saw Morgan Stanley report their results this morning, and they also missed weaker investment banking business there. Conagra Brands, I should say, that stock is down by 8% on a revenue miss. Volume was down. They also cited inflation, a real inflation focus for the company as well. On the positive side, though, in terms of what we're seeing in the marketplace, the United States, will get to Canada in a second. Tech, semiconductors are stronger, specifically TSM. They did have a beat and raised guidance. That stock up by only about 1%. And outside of earnings, IBM CEO said that they do expect tech spending to be robust. One other stock of note would be Costco was upgraded to a buy from a hold from Deutsche Bank, citing positive traffic gains, increased membership, and also renewals. So a couple of stocks to watch for sure, and I think it is very much a stock picker's market. There certainly are certain areas of the market that are doing quite well. Away from that, the TSX is down today over 1%. Off the worst levels. And of course, this follows a downbeat market in Canada yesterday. And of course, the big news in Canada was the surprise supercharged Bank of Canada rate raise by 100 basis points. The expectation was for 75 basis points. We are seeing most sectors lower here in Canada today. Really materials, energy, financials, and real estate, all the laggards. We are watching WTI, the price of oil, down by 2.3% today, down by about 10% for the week. Copper down by about 3%, and the Canadian dollar is in fact lower versus the US dollar. So very much, again, risk-off fears here in Canada, or risk-off sentiment driven by inflation fears. And again, that there could be a policy mistake on the back of the BOC raising rates by 100 basis points, and also really saying that the intention is to rein in inflation. So what does that mean? Will we really continue to see perhaps higher than expected increases in rates? And what will that do to housing, affordability, and of course the consumer? I would also point out that the big five Canadian banks did hike their prime rate to 4.7% following the move yesterday. And we're also watching the economy perhaps weaken or shrink a little bit. The manufacturing data came out. It was down by 2%. Expectations were for down by 1.5%. And just to take another look here at the price of WTI or oil, it's actually at the lowest level we've seen since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, trading at about that $90 level. And of course, there's concerns that we will see increase of lockdowns out of China because of COVID once again. But I'll point out, Julie, that Goldman Sachs still does see upside in the price of WTI. I'll leave it there. Back to you.
Thanks for that, Catherine. For more news on the financial markets, tune in to Catherine Murray on The Buck Stops Here. After the break, we will be back with news from around the world. The U.S. president continues his Middle East trip. Ukraine says Russia is targeting civilians. And the WHO reports rising COVID-19 cases. Stay tuned to Forum Daily. U.S. President Joe Biden met with Israel's Prime Minister today to talk about Iran's rapidly progressing nuclear program. Afterward, Mr. Biden told reporters that the U.S. isn't going to wait forever for Iran to rejoin a dormant nuclear deal. Resurrecting the nuclear deal brokered by the Obama administration and abandoned by Donald Trump in 2018 was a key priority for Mr. Biden as he took office. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is accusing Russia of deliberately targeting civilians. At least 21 people died and more than 100 were injured when 3 Russian missiles hit an office building and damaged nearby residential buildings in a central city in Ukraine. The Ukraine Emergency Service says 42 people are still missing. Protesters are starting to pull back from the Sri Lankan government buildings they previously seized. This after President Gotabaya Rajapaksa resigned after fleeing the country earlier this week. There is some degree of calm in the country that is in both economic and political limbo. The protesters have accused the former leader and his powerful political family of siphoning money from government coffers for years and mismanaging the economy. The Biden administration and Democrats are warning of dire consequences if U.S. Congress fails to act on computer chips legislation. They say Congress needs to pass a bill by the end of July that's designed to boost semiconductor manufacturing in the U.S. Advocates say the plan is important for the economy and for national security. The Commerce Secretary says other countries are offering incentives to computer chip makers to locate plants there. Researchers at Simon Fraser University say they've made a breakthrough in quantum technology, which opens the doors to the future of computing. A study published in the journal Nature says researchers have found a way to use intense beams of light to illuminate tiny imperfections on silicon chips used in old computer technology. The study says the potential for quantum computing goes beyond present-day supercomputers and can unlock advances in fields including chemistry, material sciences, medicine, and cybersecurity. The World Health Organization is reporting that the number of new COVID-19 infections rose by 5.7 million cases, or 6% last week. It was the 5th weekly increase in a row, but the UN Health Agency says the number of deaths remain relatively stable. In the last 2 weeks, cases of COVID-19 reported to the WHO surged 30%, driven largely by the hugely infectious Omicron subvariants BA4 and BA5. One of the world's biggest airlines has fired off a blistering letter to managers at London Heathrow's airport. Emirates is rejecting the airport's demand for airlines to cut summer flights in a bid to ease travel disruptions. It is calling the move entirely unreasonable and unacceptable, adding it shows a blatant disregard for customers. Heathrow announced on Wednesday that it was capping passenger numbers at 100,000 per day and telling airlines to stop selling tickets. This as it tries to end the chaos caused by soaring travel demand and staff shortages. An advocacy group says social media platforms are getting failing grades when it comes to stopping hate and threats against LGBTQ users. The report is from GLAAD and says that most LGBTQ people say they face menacing posts or comments while on social media. GLAAD says it's unclear how sites like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube handle such threats. An X-ray of Vincent van Gogh's head of a peasant woman has revealed a previously unknown self-portrait of the artist on the back. The National Galleries of Scotland is thrilled by the discovery and says the work is believed to have been hidden for over a century, covered by layers of glue and cardboard when it was framed in the early 20th century. Van Gogh was known for turning canvases around and painting on the other side to save money. The gallery says experts are evaluating how to remove the glue and cardboard without harming the original work. I'm Julie Stautland, filling in for Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, visit our website at thenewsforum.ca and make sure to follow our social media handles on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all our commentary programming and interviews on the News Forum YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us on Forum Daily News, and we'll see you next time. Take care, Canada.